So after successfully bending 1-inch solid steel into a usable tow bar for the shepherd's hut, I can almost mark the chassis as complete, and it only took me half a year. The next stage is constructing a curved roof, the iconic design element of a traditional shepherd's hut. But first I needed the curved roof sheets to work back from, and to get them made to my specifications for a non-outrageous price, I actually had to buy them in the UK and then drive them across to France myself, which was no small feat. I highly doubt another camping trailer has been through such a traumatic experience. Only then, once I had the 100% accurate, guaranteed dimensions of the sheets, could I make the curved roof beams themselves. And this called for a new kind of bending technique, blue laminating thin 2.5 meter strips of seasoned oak, which is easy to say but very hard to do. You need an exceptional amount of force to pull a 2.5 meter bend, and therefore you need an exceptionally suitable work surface on which to do it, something large and very rigid. So first I had to make that. For this I could use standard materials from the building merchants, stud timbers and plywood. I very much enjoyed picking wood off the shelf knowing it's already square, flat and more or less straight. I saw this work table on Instagram and it's ingenious. It uses these channels in the sawhorses, which to be honest I hadn't noticed when I bought them, and means you can build a very stable and easily movable full-size work table in a couple of hours, and once painted it doesn't look offensively yellow.
Whoa.
At this point I took a little detour. I thought it would first help to have a diagram of the shepherd's hut to help explain the roof structure. As you can see, the design revolves around a single circle, and coincidentally the radius of the circle just so happened to be 1732 millimeters, which is an important number for this channel. Long-term viewers may remember it from the roof video a few years ago, which was originally built in 1732, and this is one of the coasters I made with the stone engraving lasered onto it. So here is the important part. This circle touches the ground, the bottom outside corner of the chassis axle, and forms the top edge of the internal curved roof beam. It may look very simple now, but that single discovery took days to uncover, because there's not a guide for how to build a shepherd's hut. In fact, maybe I should make one. So I went through multiple iterations that were either too tall, too low, or had a curve that was too tight or too shallow. For the roof structure, there are essentially 4 layers. The curved beam that you'll see from inside the hut, then ceiling boards, then a hidden carcass for 80mm of insulation, and finally the corrugated roof sheets on top. But for this video, I'm focused on just the curved roof beam in red, which I wanted to make from strips of seasoned oak formed into a curve and glued together. But I'd need some pretty nice straight grain oak timbers to begin with, and thankfully the same guy who I bought the reclaimed oak beams from last year also happened to have some pretty nice oak joists stacked behind, which he agreed to sell as well. It seems the universe was on my side that day, but it was a mixed bag. Some were very lovely and some not so lovely. They came in at about 5.5 meters in total, and I needed just under 2.5 meter strips for the bend. So after cutting them in half, it was back to the slow process of flattening one face of the joist with the hand planer. Instead of going straight to the machine, this method ensures you keep as much of the joist thickness as possible and is a lot easier on the body because you only have to skim it over the surface at once. The joists came out at about 80mm thick, which was perfect, and at this point I then put them aside whilst I progressed work on the chassis itself. Almost 6 months later, I had finally picked up the roof sheets and knew for certain the radius required for the roof beams. So after dusting them off, I used an incline and guide rail to cut a straight edge to use for ripping the joist into as many 10mm strips as I could make. I'm well aware that a bandsaw would do this job nicely, but we don't have one, so I use the portable bandsaw. My thinking was that the kerf of this blade is thinner than my circular saw, so there'd be less oak wasted with each cut. However, I soon realised once again that the weight of the portable bandsaw is just a bit too heavy to be comfortable for extended periods, plus I had to keep moving the sawhorses, so I soon switched back to the 85mm circular saw. You You have to tread a very thin line cutting these strips. You need to keep them oversized so that you can creep up on the final 10mm thickness using the machine, but you don't want to cut them so fat that you waste too much of the joist, as every millimeter counts. You also have to keep a very close eye on the saw guide staying tight against the straight edge, which gets harder and harder as you run out of wood to rest the saw on. So after cutting them around 12mm, it was back over to the thicknesser to creep up on that final 10mm thickness, selecting the worst faces to remove the excess from, although there were very few with this batch. So I cut the nicest of the oak joists first, and as you can see, these strips are pretty much flawless. Very few knots or cracks or shakes, which at this point I thought was essential for every strip in a bend, and they bent beautifully with no cracking whatsoever. Even the one that had a couple of knots in. I mean, just look at this. This is why oak is king. Bad, that. I was sure that would crack. It's interesting watching this back because I wish I'd kept some of these strips for later bends, as the next few joists I cut up didn't make such nice strips. At this point I only intended to make 5 curved beams, so I needed 35 strips in total, which then increased to 11 beams, requiring 77 strips. And the truth is that you can actually use 5 bad strips in a 7-strip bend, as long as the top and bottom strips are good. So it would have been nice to keep some of these beauties for the later bends. As some of you know, this shepherd's hut is actually destined to live on the other side of the Pyrenees in Spain. But before that can happen, I need a visa and residency. That process Next, I had to make the jig itself on a fresh sheet of plywood. There were a few options for this, and I went with the easiest, just blocks screwed to the ply in a curve. But it did need a bit of improvisation to draw that curve. As you can see, the first attempt was a bit squiffy. The tape measure lock kept slipping, which messed up my line, so I drilled a couple of holes in one of the strips, which gave me a fixed, rigid distance from the center. This method worked perfectly, however the radius of this curve that I'm drawing is actually tighter than the curve I need, and that is to account for springback. Even though the glue will bind the strips together in whatever shape they're set in, the glue itself is not 100% rigid, Once the clamps are off, the outward pressure of the strips will put the glue into tension and the curve will spring back until it reaches an equilibrium, the holding point of the glue, or something will break. During my research, I found this equation in a deep corner of the internet, which calculated that I would have about 11 millimeters of spring back once the clamps are released. You may also have noted I'm using 7 strips of oak per beam. For the same reason Voldemort wanted 7 Horcruxes, 7 strips of oak hits a magical sweet spot, balancing stability and weight, strength and weakness. After cutting some blocks from a stud, I placed them at about 150mm centers, pre-drilled some holes through the plywood so I could see where to screw up from below, and knocked the corners off the blocks so they wouldn't mark the strips. These curved beams are a great example of a slow project. I picked up the oak in August 2023, made the work table in October, and only in April 2024 did I get around to bending them. There's many reasons why I take so long with projects, but a big one is my autoimmune disease, ankylosing spondylitis. It causes inflammation in my hips and can be crippling at times. I hope you can understand as much as I'd like to progress this quickly and release more videos, it's not always possible. But sometimes going slow is good. For instance, it gives you time to reflect that these screws are way too small, and the awesome power of seasoned oak could rip the blocks from the plywood, so I beefed them up. I actually put the first strips in the jig overnight to give them a bit of a pre-bend, and when I took them out I realised the cuts on the blocks needed smoothing down, as they were still imprinting grain marks onto the inside oak strip, which will be the most visible on the beam. Next, it was time to prepare all the accessories. First, I greased up my clamps, These 90-degree pivot handle Bessey clamps are quite simply the best all-round clamps money can buy, in my opinion. Then I used some painter's plastic to cover the plywood so the strips wouldn't glue themselves to it. This was probably the most annoying part of the whole process because although I tried to reuse the sheets, more often than not I'd have to put fresh plastic down for each bend. And finally, I got the glue out. But this is not the right glue. Unfortunately, when I bought it months ago, I didn't realize it was a quick setting glue, and 10 minutes is just not enough time for this size glue up. Unless you have a glue roller, which I recommend every woodworker to invest in. Definitely one of the best gadgets you can buy. So in total, there were about 4 main challenges to this glue up. The first was the 10-minute set time. The second was that once you start gluing, you can't really turn back, so if something went wrong, it would cost me the time and money to remake these valuable oak strips. Another challenge was to prevent castellations or crenellations, where the strips move up or down against each other and create profiles like the walls of medieval castles. Last but certainly not least is the danger of the clamp slipping and getting smacked in the family jewels with a punch stronger than Mike Tyson.
And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children.
Washing up liquid. Finally, I sprayed some soapy water to act as a lubricant between the strips and plastic, poured the glue, and the 10-minute countdown began. Thankfully, I didn't have a stopwatch running during the glue up, but it took me just over 6 minutes to apply glue to all the strips, over half the set time. If I was using a glue with a longer open time, I may have gradually clamped the bend from the middle out, but the quicker option was to use these one-handed clamps with unlimited travel, unlike the screw clamps which only have about 3 inches of travel. I bent the lamination to the point where the strips were about to come into contact with the first blocks from the center, then clamped these with the pivot handles before bending further until the strips almost touched the next block, and so on and so forth. I kept an eye on them rising or falling against each other, forming those crenellations I mentioned, and where I saw it start to happen, I used a mallet and block of wood to knock them down against the plywood. Bear in mind that this was the first glue up of 11 curved beams, 6 for the shepherd's hut itself, 3 for a possible outbuilding, and 2 for a wood store, which means I could have quite easily waited until number 11 before filming to impress you all with my technique after ironing out all the kinks, but it's much more interesting for you to see the first go and comment about how you would have done it differently.
Nice.
It took me about 18 minutes to finish this first bend, so way past the set time, and it was quite the rush. My heart rate maxed out at 160 beats per minute, which apparently is a fast run, not that I know much about running.
That is stress. It's not perfect. We're low on the inside. and then we're high on this side, so it's kicking up. But apart from that, hopefully it's all good. Touch wood. I think I used too much glue, so I can change that next time. That was intense.
I then waited 48 hours before taking the clamps off, probably 24 hours longer than I really needed to, but there's a huge amount of tension in these strips and they are just too valuable to ruin with impatience.
So according to the calculation, this should spring back 11 millimeters. So halfway between these blocks, this block is about 11, 12, this is 9, so calculation seems spot on.
The glue was still a little soft on the underside of the beam, which is actually handy because I still need to send it through the thicknesser, and I want to use this face, which was against the plywood, as the reference, instead of the top side, which has bumps of dried glue, which could put a twist into the beam. So after scraping off the residue, I evaluated my creation. I've never laminated anything before, and to attempt this with a fast setting glue alone is quite simply reckless, but it came out very nicely. There are clearly improvements to make, and I've come up with a couple of solutions which I'll document in the next video. I will also address whether it's possible to have used steam bending for this. If you go to the live section on my channel, you can see I live streamed the third glue up, and the fact that it's got nearly 300,000 views is quite astonishing. So maybe I'll do another stream for the final glue up. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like, but do ensure you're subscribed with the bell notification thing on so you don't miss it if and when I do it. And very quickly before I go, I've just been to Portugal to inspect the next batch of work jackets, which are looking lovely and will be shipped imminently. So if you're looking for a decent summer jacket, now would be a very good time to buy one at kotoworks.com. And thank you to everyone's patience while they were being made. Thanks for watching.